So it might be a bit ironic for a talk about the future to start with a photo from 1936, but there is a story. So let me zip 75 years forward into the future from this moment to a restaurant in Canberra called Du Jour. Now, Du Jour, when translated from French to English, is Trend of the Day, which was a fairly apt title for this restaurant, because that's where CSIRO, where I work, started a project on global megatrends that will change the way we live. I was sat down in the restaurant by a senior colleague, and he said, we want to do two things: create a crazy idea space in CSIRO where we think about things we don't usually think about, but secondly, to work out the future of the world for the next 20 years. So I said yes, because I had no idea. And I went back into the past archives of CSIRO to see if anyone else had thought about the future in the past. And it took me back to this photo here of our highly gender diverse board of directors back in the year 1935. And yeah, very fun, relaxed bunch. I think they're heading out to a rave later that night, actually. But so these guys were thinking hard about the future, because in 1935 things were about to change a lot. In 1939 World War II would begin, and in 1941 I think it was, Darwin was bombed and Australia had military action on shore, and the whole of the CSIRO research effort became fully engaged in helping win the war. So, and I've just realised I left the slide clicker down there, but so I could get that, it'd be great. But they had an enormous amount of change in front of them. And that's what got me thinking about, could they predict those specific events? Could they see in 1939 that war would break out? No. But could they start to read a changing geopolitical situation around them and start to make some decisions about how to position the organisation and proactively invest resources to get change? And I found that a fairly compelling idea, to think that today we may also have massive change around us. So to do this project looking into the future, we went to a crowdsourcing model. Now, when you steal ideas off one person, they call it plagiarism, but if you steal ideas off lots of people, it becomes research. So we went down this path of doing research, where we opened up an internet site for all our staff. We've got 6,500 staff and 4,500 scientists, and they could enter trends that they were observing. So we might get a trend about the rising use of nanotechnology, and then someone else can jump on and edit on top of that trend, and the knowledge base grew. Initially, when we put it out there, it hung, and I think that's because scientists are very shy and no one wanted to be the first to put their trend on this site. But once we got a couple, it ramped up fairly in an S-shaped way till we had a couple of hundred trends on it, and we saw across many fields of the world. Thinking that we couldn't have possibly done sort of from one person's perspective. And it struck me about how humans innately want to share knowledge, and also how powerful it is when you get different people's perspectives about how the future might be and what might change. So from this product, we've revised our thinking, and we've come up with 6 megatrends of global change. What's a megatrend? This is where a lot of trends intersect to create some bigger or more important trajectory of change. And I think an example of a megatrend that hit a company was the megatrend of digitisation that struck the film company in the United States called Eastman Kodak. So these guys make their money out of selling print film and print film cameras. And in 1975, they even helped develop the digital camera. They supplied some of the underlying technology. This trend of digitisation was happening, and it wasn't until the late 90s that they started to see something was going to happen to change their business model. They introduced a website called oPhoto, later renamed Kodak EasyShare, where after the barbecue on the weekend you can put up a photo and someone will print it out and buy the photo for $5.95, and it was meant to generate money that way. But at the same time, a bunch of uni students at Harvard were developing a different model, which would later be called Facebook. They had the digitisation trend about right. It wasn't about printing photographs. This was about social networking in a whole completely different world. Kodak were on train tracks down here, and they really needed to jump onto some quite different train tracks to be able to survive. So in 2011, they end up filing for bankruptcy. So that's a nature of a megatrend, is a big shift. And we've got this responsibility in the team I lead, CSIRO Futures, to think about megatrends that will reshape Australia's environment. So we came up with these 6, and the first one we've titled More from Less. This one looks at the increasing pressures on resource scarcity that the world's going to face. So the world population has crossed the 7 billion persons threshold, and it levels out at 10 billion people sometime later this century. That's another 3 billion people, and we're continuing to see economic growth rates in the Asia-Pacific region and developing economies of around 6 to 9%. And as they develop, that's more resources that they consume. It captures food, mineral, energy and water resources, but let's jump into food quite quickly. And let's think about mullets here. Maybe there's a mullet connection somewhere, I know it. So for quite a while, this graph here shows us the Global Food Price Index from the United Nations. It's basically an index of how much food costs entire humanity, and it's a pretty good estimate of what's happening. Now, it's been a fairly flat line until we get to around 2005, where it went up, and then in 2008 it spiked at high levels. That's a humanitarian crisis because in the developing world, poor households will spend 80% plus of their income on food. So when prices spike, they can't stop buying movie tickets and buy more food because the budget is already allocated. So it transmits to starvation quite quickly. And that first spike was associated with 150 million people in the world going into starvation and malnutrition, which was a humanitarian crisis. It came back down again, but in 2011 spiked at even yet higher levels. Now, price is an indicator that captures supply and demand, and it's showing us something quite significant in the global food production system. It's showing us that supply is not keeping pace with demand. As population grows, as a new wealthy Asia switches its diet into protein like milk, fish, eggs and meat, we see at the same time land availability for agriculture decrease. Every year the world loses 12 million hectares of agricultural land, and if it stayed in production it would have made 20 million tonnes of grain. So supply is constrained and demand is going up and prices are going high, and food security is likely to stay a major issue for the world for the decades that come ahead. The next megatrend that we identified in this study is called going, going, gone. Now this one looks at the state of the world's biodiversity. So mineral, food, energy and water resources all have prices because they're traded. But cassowaries, dugongs and the Great Barrier Reef are highly valuable to us here in Australia, but they are untraded and therefore unpriced. And it is true, as we looked into the literature and the data, we can see that the world's biodiversity is in a precarious situation. One of the papers that got me in particular was arguing that the coming decades will set the scene for the coming millennia in terms of the world's biodiversity. And these ecologists were arguing that more species are on the brink of extinction today than ever before. The pressures bearing down upon them are greater than ever before, particularly associated with the rapid income growth in the developing world and the rapid industrialisation. There is a good news part to this story, and the team was wanting to call this one a window of opportunity. We kind of went glass half empty, but the idea was that we're also seeing humanity make a greater response, both in public sector and private sector, than it ever has done before. So there is a chance here that in the coming decades we can turn around the rate of biodiversity loss. One of the ecosystems under most threat is coral reefs. Australian Institute of Marine Science measure the Great Barrier Reef, and year by year the area of hard coral cover is shrinking and it's decreasing. Worldwide, we will lose some 60% of the coral reefs by the year 2030, which to me is an absolute staggering statistic about the rate of biodiversity loss the world is experiencing. The next mega trend is called the Silk Highway. This is a play on the Silk Road, an ancient trade network throughout Asia which saw goods flow from Asia and into Europe. Well, this trade network is reversing itself and it's going a hell of a lot faster, so we've used the term the Silk Highway. The big thing that matters to the world economy in coming decades is this repositioning of GDP output from the developing world and into the developed world. This graph here, or the map, sorry, here shows you the centre of gravity of the world economy. Where does all the GDP in the world gravitate based on GDP output from all the countries? So in 1980, that hotspot is located in the Atlantic Ocean, in between the powerhouses of the United States and Europe. By 2010, today it's over Saudi Arabia. By 2030, it is between India and China. So another name for this megatrend was the Orient Express, which that train travelled from Paris to Istanbul in a southeasterly direction. And I think this is what we're seeing with the world economy. It is shifting, and it's really down to the economic powerhouses of India and China, which are now two large economies, but have been experiencing annual rates of economic growth in 6 to 9%. And are likely to continue to do so for some time, and it will completely reposition the world economy. As this change occurs, 1.02 billion people in the Asia region are going to cross an income threshold from being poor to middle income class, and that's the establishment of a massive new market and big opportunities also for Australia. I think we're seeing it in the tourism sector. As fiscal conditions deteriorated back in Europe and the United States, we saw our tourism sector was somewhat saved by the arrival of the new Chinese and Indian, Taiwanese, South Korean visitor who were cashed up and high daily spenders as well. And those graphs continue to rise. That's a big new growth market for us. It's going to matter a lot for our economy. But it's in addition to a market opportunity, I think we see a massive challenge on the other hand as well. We've done some work in the manufacturing sector, and Australia's manufacturing sector has been for some time and is likely to continue to be challenged by cheaper imports coming from other countries. What we've seen in the manufacturing sector is that our manufacturing plants are sort of 50 to 60 years old, some of them, and they're kind of being kept alive on WD-40. Their ones are 5 to 10 years old, highly efficient, and when we go out the back, it's not cookie cutter research, it's advanced nanotechnology research, quite remarkable research that's linked to those. So as part of this, we feel a wave of competition is coming that didn't previously exist. So the change in China, I think, is truly phenomenal. As part of this, we're also likely to see the Chinese economy transition out of a phase of industrialisation and towards an advanced services sector economy. And I think that's quite an interesting transition, because they might not want to buy rocks off Australia so much. They may in the future want to start to buy knowledge and ideas. The next megatrend we call forever young. So our population is currently some 13% over the age of 65, but by the year 2050, we will be 25% over the age of 65. In Japan, 40% of the population will be over the age of 70 by the year 2050. Right across the world, we're seeing this shift into a much more age demographic structure, with profound implications for the services we demand and how we're living. The age-gender distribution is supposed to be an egg-shaped thing of young, middle-aged and old. It's going coffee cup to wine glass, or a morbid colleague of mine who's a demographer says coffin-shaped as we move into the future. Connected to this is a retirement savings gap. So if we project Australians forward into the future and make them all retire, in the year 2002, we had a $485 billion shortfall in what was needed to give them all a comfortable retirement. Today, we've got a $1 trillion shortfall in what's needed to have a comfortable retirement. This phenomena has to push back life expectancy, has to push back retirement ages. In fact, life expectancy will grow, and I think one of the upcoming speeches about regenerative medicine is going to give us some insights into how that might occur. But life expectancy will go forward further, and we've got this massive retirement savings gap. So a lot of younger people, most of the people in the audience are young by the look, but you won't ever retire, possibly. You're likely, just to make you happy as a thought to take home, you're likely to continue working throughout. It isn't actually all that bad. The studies do show that with the right type of connection in a tapered retirement model, physical and mental health is likely to be better for you if you retain some level of connection to the workforce later in life. So some massive challenges, I think, arise from that forever young megatrend. The next one we call virtually here, which captures the rise of the digital world. So we can see that happening around us. And I think it's continuing at a staggering rate. The number of devices, people getting connected online is quite important. If you're a physical shop, you can't really win against the online environment in terms of price, product range, product quality, convenience, the gaps being closed. The place you win is the experience factor, and I think this is potentially what creates the ceiling for online expansion. Similar with the office sector too. We see a future where it is much more likely that people generate income over internet connections working remotely than necessarily coming into the office. I think 6% of Australians currently telework, generate all their income off an internet connection. We're likely to see that get to about 12% by only 2015. So a profound shift there that may even start to change the way our cities look and how people want to move through our cities. The last bit on virtually here that we point towards is this rising tide of automation. The last century saw automation rise in the manufacturing world. So a modern car plant, I think, produces a car every 6 seconds via the use of highly advanced robotics, and a labour-intensive model cannot come close to competing. And over the past century, we saw in the United Kingdom manufacturing sector low-skilled jobs disappear and a shift towards high-skilled jobs. Overall, there was employment growth, but it wasn't evenly distributed. There were certainly some sections that were vulnerable. This century, I think we're going to see automation come out of the factory and into the real world. So mining, for example, a modern mine site can be close to fully automated with a skeleton staff. In the Pilbara, Rio Tinto operate trucks that are driverless, and they do so via robotics, and they're highly efficient, safe, and more effective in a lot of ways. So we're likely to see the mining sector move towards cost-cutting via the use of automation. In the defence sector, I think there's a clear pathway there towards the use of drone aircraft with ethical issues as well, but we're likely to see much more use of robotics to take human beings out of battlefield situations. In the agricultural sector, I was in New Zealand and saw a presentation on a vine pruning system that is able to image the vine, and with its scissors, the robotic hands can trim it to prune the vine, and it was found to be 80% better than a human being, and it will continue to improve over time. And in the transportation sector, we know that you might have heard of Google Car, which is due to be released by 2015. When it's driving down the highway, it is able to scan around it, work out the blind spots of all the other cars, and then drive in the optimal position on the highway. And when was the last time you managed to pull that off on a trip down the coast? You can't. And I think as we look into the future, I've got 2 kids who are 3 and 7. I wonder how their skill sets are differentiated in a world with a much more competitive Asia with advanced skills plus an automated world as well. The last megatrend we called Great Expectations. The initial title the team came up with was The Way You Make Me Feel, which was Michael Jackson. Now CSIRO is a bit conservative, so we shifted towards Charles Dickens as the title for this one. This is a consumer and societal megatrend that looks at the changing attitudes of consumers and a shift into the experience space. So consider, before we jump into this slide about beer, consider a kid's birthday party. In the past, we traded milk, eggs, cocoa across the farm fence, put a lot of effort into making a chocolate cake, and it became a centrepiece of the party. If we zip forward a bit further into the future, we can go to a cake shop and we get a football cake, a digger cake, or we've got to make a fairy princess cake fairly soon. And it's the feel-good factor and the experience that surrounds it. Go forward a little bit further into the future, and we don't buy a cake anymore. We rent a party company, and they come with a clown, a magician, decorations, and the cake is thrown in free of charge as part of the package. This is this concept of immersion into an experience economy. Most of the expenditure is not on the physical good anymore, it's on the experiences with no material transaction that surrounds it. And as these 1.02 billion people cross the income threshold in Asia, they're moving into this experiential space, and here in Australia we're continuing as well. Why do we do it? It's because of non-linear returns to utility. So that's the dismal science economics way of saying happiness is utility. Let me give an example of why this shift occurs. So when, after these talks today, you go down the pub, you enter that pub there in a neutral state of utility or happiness. Okay, from beer 1 to beer 2, you get a bit happier. 2 to 3, happier still. 3 to 4, you get a bit happier. But then from 4 to 5 to 6, it starts to decline a little until you get what's known as the second wind. And 7, 8, 9, you get a bit more cheerful. But then it does start to crash and burn and crosses the line around 10 until at the end of the night down there you buy a kebab. That is sort of an all too familiar experience out of first year uni for me. It's not likely, with the exception of men's power tools and women's shoes, it's not likely to be the linear line. We're likely to see a shift into experiential space. And that is a drive that is going to redefine the way the economy works into the future. So look, I want to now come to the conclusion of the presentation. And this is another photo just before World War II in 1936, just out at a resort town out of Warsaw in Poland. And this actually happens to be my grandfather, who was a colonel in the engineering corps of the Polish army. That's my grandmother. We don't really know who that is, but what the photo tells me is these 6 megatrends of tumultuous global change that stand in front of us, which do matter, stood in front of these guys. Their world is about to get totally turned on its head, and they are going to have to use all their resilience, ingenuity, cleverness, all the resources and capabilities they have to navigate change that is probably greater than anything anyone in here will perform. They did, and that's why I'm standing here today. So I think despite the change that's in front of us, we do have this opportunity, and we've done it in the past, to find and navigate a way through to a better future. Thank you very much for your time.